Are there techniques that you've seen or different things that you'd suggest that carers could use to help their child express their thoughts or feelings?
Yeah, I mean, amazing question. I just think some of the work I have done alongside families and supporters and carers, I just absolutely love it because they're just the most amazing people, first and foremost. And if those here are watching from MFT, every time I have been along in person, I've just cried because you're all amazing. And it's so humbling to see a group of people coming forwards and wanting to learn how to support their family and their child. So first and foremost, just a huge well done for being here and being vulnerable. That takes a lot of courage. Second of all, I don't believe families cause eating disorders. I think we know from research that a lot of it is down to personality and genetics and other factors. So I think carers really need to look after themselves. I think, there can be such a role strain on carers, especially if you're implementing family-based treatment or, family therapy for anorexia nervosa, for bulimia. There's a lot going on. And so when I've worked alongside carers, which I still do now, it's actually, okay, how are we going to fill your cup up? How are we going to make sure that you are giving from a place where you've got something to give? And that's very hard to do as a parent when, as a parent myself, you want to do everything for your child. And I think the other thing is, that we've got all the carer skills workshops. So I love those. Some of you might have heard of Jenny Langley, who runs the Maudsley Carers website, of which we can make sure that you get the link to if you'd like it. And she's got every video skill thing going on under the sun on that website. So I quite often send that out to people because you can just watch her videos and it's really practical support on having empathy for the person with an eating disorder, actual communication techniques. So we know that there are things that we can do as carers and supporters to allow the person who has experienced the eating disorder to step forwards in their communication. And so, yeah, definitely look those up. But what I would always say is boundaries. I think the most helpful thing that my family did, so my parents did, was to have boundaries with me. I think it really helped me to know where the fence was. So I quite often give the story to when I've done talks in the past, but for me, when I was in a phase where I was in treatment. I was really engaged. However, I was quite happily sitting at a low weight, thinking that I could get better. I think my parents, bless their hearts, were quite worried about me because I was physically unwell, and finding it really hard to know how to support me. But I was on the cusp of thinking, yeah, okay, I'm getting this now. I can't recover at low weight. And for me, and I know it's not the same for everyone, but I was really hungry at low weights. I know for some that switches off, but for me, it was torturous. So I was always trying to, manage that. And sometimes that would mean I had difficulties with binging in the evening and would feel very out of control. I went through this phase of, what did I do? I cut swede up, put it in the oven and eat that at about 2:00 in the morning. Now, can you imagine my poor parents trying to sleep and they've got this smell of swede burning, because I would burn it as well. The kind of the swede smoke coming under their bedroom door, bless their hearts. And I think it was a real turning point in communication because they needed to address it with me because A, it was actually meaning they weren't sleeping because they could smell it. It was waking them up. And B, well, I suppose they wanted to understand what was going on for me with it. So actually when they approached me, it wasn't the kind of, what are you doing? Which if they had done, I think that would have really caused me to feel a lot of shame. And when I felt shame, and I think when a lot of people feel shame, what do? We disconnect, we retreat, we feel awful about ourselves, we feel guilty. But what my mum and dad did was they said, could you just explain to us? We need to understand. We would like to understand what's going on with the swede. And I'm like, but that felt very safe because
Yeah.
I didn't feel picked on. I felt they were trying to meet me where I was at, and I didn't feel shame. So I was able to then open up to them and say, well, this is what's going on. I'm trying to kind of not binge, but I'm hungry. And they said, well, we need you to know, this is what mum and dad would say to me, we need to know that we want to support you in the best way we can. But to do that, we really need our sleep. And so how can we can't really have you cooking in the middle of the night. That's not okay. But we want to support you to understand, how could we set a goal to move that earlier? And by the way, you can't use the oven. But what do you need to do in the evenings to feel supported? So you can kind of learn from that conversation that there was a boundary of this is not okay. We want to understand. However, this is what it needs to look like.
Yeah.
And this is the boundary. And so then I was like, oh, okay. I felt very validated and heard in that conversation. And I said, well, maybe I could bring it forwards or eat something else. And so we were able to explore that together without me feeling shame. But it was kind of conversations like that. And we would, as a family, have a weekly family meeting about food and eating stuff, because I needed to feel safe. So when I was at home and I knew I was doing all kinds of behaviours, I knew they saw that, but I was so anxious about being picked on because at any moment I thought, they're going to pick on me because I know I've just taken that or I'm doing this. And I felt really unsafe around that. So we agreed that, and this is when, things were less risky, when things were starting to settle, that we would have a meeting once a week where we would each bring things we needed to discuss, and me included, around things that were annoying me, because they did annoy me. They're still my parents, and there was things, and they're not perfect. No parent is. But we would have boundaries around that meeting. No one, if anyone kind of, I was going to swear then, lost their then we would end the meeting. And people had to be calm and communicate well. And that worked really well because it was a protected space for me to communicate, but I didn't feel scrutinised. And, I was 18, 19 at this point, so I was an adult. So, and that seemed to work really well. So then, we could talk about things, some very uncomfortable things though, like cleaning up vomits and, boundaries around that. And, some of this is really tricky stuff, and some of my behaviours were really hard for them. So, however, we did get there with communication and understanding. So when I look at all those carer skills videos now, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what they did. And I'm very lucky that someone in the midst of my journey just handed my mum and dad a book on boundaries. There wasn't really carer support around those times, but they were part of a church community actually, and some of the people around them were amazing in supporting them, which I'm so grateful for, because actually as they got more aligned, set boundaries with me, then I really did progress and feel safe.